it's very hard. When you think it through, then you'll see how difficult that is and what will the Pope do about it. He doesn't want to have just to have this welfare thing. That's not fair. Our idea, what I just want to say and what I forgot, is the middle class. What we understand of middle class are the workers which are well paid in the car industry. That is called middle class. And we always think that in the colonies in Latin America that is missing. So that there we have the extreme of the rich and the poor and there's nothing in between. So therefore you see this hammering every night on the middle class which has to be rescued and so on. It is not that they want to do away with the fourth estate or that they want to change anything on top, but they want to have somebody in the middle who has a little house and a garage and a car and so on. That means he has something to lose. They want to have something in the middle where somebody has something to lose. Those in the fourth estate have nothing to lose. But if you make them that they could lose something, you may integrate them, so you may include them that way.
Rudy?
Yes?
Do you want to make it clear what the estates are?
Yeah, okay, estate is an old word, right? So before the revolution in England and in France and so on, you had the first estate, which was the clergy on top of it. Then you had the nobility, the King of England and so on. Then you had the bourgeoisie, the shopkeepers and people, shoemakers and so on. And then underneath you had the fourth estate of servants and so on. When you see that movie, what is it there, Downton and
Downton Abbey?
There you see the whole class system, right? And you see also the party system, which is connected, the Tories for the nobility and the Liberals for the third estate and so on. Later on, the word class was introduced there. So it's a little bit old-fashioned, but it makes clear because we have that fourth estate and we said we have no Labour Party. That means there are 250 million people who are not even represented, or they are represented by people who are not from their class. Tonight, a socialist came on. We had one socialist in Congress, and he talked in favor of the workers and so on, but he has become independent now because the word socialist is so terrible. So, and why is it so terrible? Well, because we have the fourth estate, right? So, and we don't want them to talk. So they have to be shut up. Okay, anything else? Any other question? Very, very good there. When you have any word or whatever which I use.
I'll make a comment.
Yeah.
It strikes me that the Pope is very astute psychologically in the technique he uses to communicate, because
right.
in facilitating change psychologically,
Yeah.
you have to validate
Right.
before you contradict.
Right, yeah. And he did that very well, right?
He did that very well.
Yeah. So that he says, you know, and I mean, it's not entirely Jesuitism, because it's true. I mean, the third estate, you know, has created miracles. I mean, they are responsible for electric light. They are responsible for the cars. They invented the airplanes and so on, you know. So even Marx, you know, he writes a whole chapter on the greatness of the bourgeoisie. So they were much more productive than the clergy or the nobility ever was. But then they have that dark side. You see, the dark side is that when they made the revolution, they pretended it was universal. That means what the Pope calls inclusive. But in reality, it was exclusive. So while our people who made the Constitution in Philadelphia, while they did this freedom, equality, and all that, the slaves were standing outside with their horses. They were not included. And the European Americans were also not included if they didn't belong to the bourgeoisie. And also. So that is, so when we say, you know, we are a free country or whatever, what we do is we take the utopia of the freedom of all, which Christianity has brought into history, not only Christianity, but also Judaism and Islam, and we take this utopia, which does not exist yet, and turn it into an ideology which defends the freedom of the few. Our freedom of the few are not slaveholders. The slaveholders whom we had were overthrown in the last bourgeois revolution, namely the Civil War. The Civil War means that the northern ruling class annihilated the southern ruling class, because the Union could not have two ruling classes. To rescue the Union, one had to be annihilated, and one was annihilated. If you annihilate the slaveholders, you have no slaves anymore. But For 50 years the slaves remained slaves. Atlanta, Washington was built still by slaves. Only by 1900 some of these slaves were shipped up here by Henry Ford, and he used them here as strikebreakers against the whites. And that went on up to the 20s to the sit-in strike, when things then changed a little bit and the so-called middle class was created. So I mention that too because the Pope psychologically that is good and so on, but fundamentally these are the rock bottom realities which we have to ask, what does he want to do about them? Where does the church want to stand? See, we specifically, I'm not Irish, but I love all the Irish. So when the Irish came over here, they were very poor and they couldn't read, and they cleaned the streets of Boston. And then they made it slowly up in the class system, and the Kennedys were in the upper middle class. They were not in the lower upper class. They couldn't go into a country club like this. But they made it up there, and other Catholics made it too, and so on. So when they couldn't read yet, they couldn't read Solidarism. They couldn't read the social encyclicals. After they made it, they didn't want to read them anymore, because now they had it, and they didn't want to criticize themselves. So that is why here the Catholics and the evangelicals too voted, twice for Bush, in spite of the fact that he was for the death penalty. The church had changed its mind about it. The Pope asked some of these people not to be killed, and even after 2 wars, illegal wars by the 7-point just war theory of Augustine, they still voted for him. So that has something to do with a strange type of thing, that Catholics came from the underground and they could not know what the church teaches, and then when they could read, they didn't want to read it anymore. When I came to Baltimore, I taught for the Jesuits in Baltimore. I taught economics, and they told me I could not teach the social encyclicals. And I said, "You have written them." "Yes," they said, "I have written them, but you cannot teach them here. You lose all your friends." And I said, "Well, let me teach it anyway." And so I did, and I didn't lose all friends, really. I have still friends today, so it was not entirely true, but it shows, what the situation is in this country. So that most Catholics don't know that they are solidarists, that they have a position between liberalism and socialism, and very well worked out, in Aristotelian terms and so on, very intelligent, and modern science involved. He has respect for economics, which is the most precise of all the social sciences. So that is the reason why we are where we are when we talk about social justice or so, because it didn't come through somehow because of the class situation of Catholics in this country. Quantitatively, we are fourth. We are still a fourth of the population, so that is an unbelievable voting bloc. So, I don't think that, I would say that maybe 1 or 2% of Catholics are aware that as Catholics they have a social ethics which is an alternative to the prevailing liberalism and an alternative to socialism as well. So, okay, we can talk about this a little bit more. Thank you for your comment. That's true. That was, I think the document is psychologically very well done. Okay, do we have anything else? We have our time diagnosis. Is there anything else which you would like to comment, or words which we should explain a little more? You can bring the ideas from the Islamic side too.
Well, I was just thinking about, the Pope took the name Francis, and he seems very gentle with the people in Davos, but that's in many ways the same way that Francis was with the wealthy in Assisi too, that even though in many ways he condemned the wealth and all of that social destruction that came with the wealth, he was still very peaceful and loving to them. The question is, does that change anything? Does that allow it to continue on?
Yeah, editing a book about Malcolm X, and you know Malcolm X here from Michigan. His mother was in the insane asylum here, up there here in Kalamazoo, and he fought up, of course, Malcolm X for some time. He was for violence, and he also converted to Islam because of the fourth commandment in the Sermon on the Mount to hold up the other cheek, because that was entirely impractical in the face of your American police force and society and racist society and dogs and so on and so on. After he traveled in the Near East and in Africa, he had a change of heart which brought him into a dangerous position with the black Muslims and the groups in there. So that is the issue then, how civil, this letter is very civil and very nice, and yeah, St. Francis, you know, he was tough and threw his clothing to his father, businessman, into his face and stood naked there and that was rough. And when he came home from Spain once, his brothers had moved into a new house and he ordered them out of the house. Even the sick brothers had to leave and so on. So he could be very, very tough, but always in a loving and brotherly way, right? So, but you know, the effectiveness and modernity, we have to do in the Middle Ages, people said, okay, I do what I can and Providence will do the rest. Modern people will not buy this. If we don't deliver, if Christians don't deliver of what they promise, they will be out of the public sphere. They will just not be listened to. They can then babble in their own sphere as long as they want to, but they will not be effective. But it's not only the Christians in general. So we had this Martin Luther King, but you know, it was a complicated way how Martin Luther King got the non-violent type of a thing. So since he was effective, you know, he got the civil rights thing got through, but it took Kennedy's death and his own death and so on in order to move the civil rights a little bit forward without changing the racist structures as we see every day. So the Martin Luther King studied in Boston College, and he had a professor who taught him Hegel, the great bourgeois thinker, and there he got this whole idea of freedom and liberation and so on. They all got that from Hegel, but the method, the West never had a theory of a just revolution. It only had this Augustinian theory of just war. So the West was so bound to the state that the thought of revolution was already abhorrent. So therefore they did not legislate anything in this direction. So therefore he had to go outside of Christianity to Hinduism in Mahatma Gandhi. So he got the non-violent method from Mahatma Gandhi, and it was totally strange here even for his own friends or so. And Malcolm X expressed the other side too, that it's not effective. You cannot overcome this horror in which we are there by just holding up the other cheek and so on. And we have to say, you know, if somebody whose parents have been killed in Auschwitz and he sees Eichmann walking through the streets somewhere in Latin America and he goes to the street and shoots him, everybody would understand that as a first impulse. So it is somehow the eye for eye, tooth for tooth, leg for leg. It was in the Hebrew Bible, it goes through the whole body. Is something very understandable. It is a step in the development of our ethical consciousness that we, that we do want to have the other eye. It is already a step of civilization when we say one eye for one eye. The state of Israel takes 10 eyes for one eye when they attack Gaza. So that is a regression. That is a regression in terms of moral consciousness. So they had to tell this to people, and we see that he was here, by the way, in 1963. Martin Luther King was here and explained here in the stadium there, not the Miller Auditorium that wasn't built yet. The university had invited the fascists, which they do sometimes, and then the governor, Romney, the father of the Romney there, he was governor here, he criticized the university for inviting this fascist. How could you do that? So they invited Martin Luther King instead, and he was in the field house, his students there, and he presented that non-violent method. And because there were people on the other side, black people who, the African Americans who thought Martin Luther King was not brutal enough. In a brutal world, one had to be brutal and so on. And but Martin Luther King, in a very beautiful way, on the radio here too, tried to make people understand that this method can be effective, because alone by confusing the enemy, because the police force is so used, that the opposite will be violent and so on, that they suddenly are not violent. That is a confusing type of a thing. And we had the Gandhi did this in a masterful way, where you had Hindus marching to the British soldiers there. They were beaten up, they beat on their head and bloody, and so they would go back. Their wives would bandage their heads, and the bandaged heads, they would come back again, and that would go day after day after day. While before, the British had massacred 10,000 of them in the most brutal way. And so slowly, the little naked men, overcame the resistance of the occupation force of the colonialists. Mountbatten came and had to surrender to him. Why? Because there was in Britain, in the nobility, there was a feeling of honor. There was one thing, to kill thousands of people, but then there was this little naked man with this message, and they did not go further than to imprison him. They did not dare to assassinate him. He was assassinated by another Hindu because he was too conciliatory to the Muslims. So that is where it came from. So we can say Mahatma Gandhi, he was effective. He got rid of the colonial master. Martin Luther King was effective. So we cannot simply, in limits. If we think, that he died during a garbage collector strike, that means, as his son recently said, he died for the distribution of wealth there, and not only for African Americans here, but also for the white workers. And not only the white workers here, but also the Asian workers in Vietnam. He included them. That was too much. He had to be killed. So, but you can see in the I gave an abstract to Dustin, about that Malcolm X book, an article in it. You see that we have a whole line of presidents, liberal and Christian presidents, who were all assassinated here. Garfield was assassinated, and so on and so on, so up to Kennedy. It is more dangerous to be a religious and a liberal person than to be a Stalin or a Hitler or what. They are much better protected. That's why one has to be afraid of Obama there all the time. Hitler had 42 assassinations and attempts, and nothing worked. So, and we had attempted attacks on Truman even. We had attempted attacks on Roosevelt. People are not even remembering that anymore. So Theodore Roosevelt, the first one, they made him vice president in order to neutralize him. And then the president was killed, was assassinated, and he became president. He had been the vice mayor in Manhattan at the time when Lower Manhattan marched up and butchered the landlords up in Upper Manhattan and burned the houses down. And he settled that, but not only by force, but he also saw that we needed health insurance, 1908. And that we needed federal intervention and control of civil society. And then he became president, and he took Carnegie, Rockefeller, and so they took them all to court because of monopoly law violations, and many of them were dismantled and so on. So we have a very traumatic history, and we have a horrible fear in our bodies from the Civil War, from the last bourgeois revolution. Almost 1 million people died in that war, not 500,000. The 500,000 number comes from the fact that the widows of the Confederacy were not paid. Only the widows of the Union Army was paid. So therefore they had only the Union casualties, but not the Confederacy casualties. If you count them too, then you come close to 1 million. and we were only 40 million Americans at that time. So this is why we are slow, why American people will be slow to do something radical. That means to remove the ruling class, which was victorious in the Civil War, which was victorious in the First World War, which destroyed the Second World War, and lost the Vietnam War, lost the Iraq War, lost the Afghan War. But these were little wars. The big wars were won by them, and that strengthened them. So that is the extreme thing when we look at the empirical reality. But the question is if violence is an option at all, and therefore it is so important to look at a non-violent possibility. And solidarism is one option, where one says we keep private property, we keep the class system, but we want to modify it in that way that people don't live that life there in all our slums, rural and urban, as they do now, up to 50 million of them, which is no life at all, which is unacceptable. So it's a possibility to make the Democratic Party into a socialist party. It was in some states, socialist party, social democratic type of party, or a third party, which is very hard to do, because both bourgeois parties are paid. And one would have to pay it, one would have to pay one's own television stations. They're all paid by the corporations. So sacrifices would have to be necessary in order to do this. So, but all that, surrounds this this figure now. And when we take this letter, then we could not only make a time diagnosis, but also time prognosis, like we could with Obama. We knew with Obama he would not get outside of Roosevelt liberalism, and he doesn't. The same thing I would predict with the Pope. He will not go outside of Catholic solidarism. He may push it to the border, but not further than that. That means he will not challenge the private appropriation of collective labor, and the Wall Street said already, if you want to do the charity thing, that's fine. We all love the poor. My best friends are poor, but if you want to do something about it, then you will not get very far. That means we withdraw the money, we buy up the Vatican. Okay, anything else? What time is it now?
8:30.
So we want to have a little bit more time for this. But let me just make 1 point, maybe 2 points more. So inner criticism there, I mentioned that already. So let me repeat that again. We cannot stand, above all the world religions and pass judgment on them or whatever. We cannot put one above all the others and so on. The only fair way is that we judge people, Islam. What is a good Muslim? A good Muslim is somebody who, here it is, in our discourse, we apply inner criticism to Christianity as to all world religions and humanism. So Catholicism as the third paradigm of Christianity as well, as we are here now. We judge each religion or humanism by its own interpretation of reality and orientation of action. Jews by the Decalogue, the Ten Commandments, and the 613 mitzvot, and the Christians by the Sermon on the Mount, and the Muslims by the Decalogue, by the 5 pillars, and by the Sharia law, and the Hindus by the Bhagavad Gita, and so on and so on and so on. That's the only fair way to say somebody is a good Christian or a good Muslim or a good Jew or whatever. He is one who follows his own teachings, his own confessions, his own witnesses, and so on. So that is our attitude which we want to take here. Then it would not be fair to judge Pope Francis by modern liberalism. The Pope is not a liberal, and it would be unfair to ask him to do liberal things. He is also not a socialist, so we cannot demand that from him neither. He's also not a fascist, and so on. In spite of the fact that solidarism unfortunately allied itself in the 20th century with fascism. So we have all kinds of concordance between Hitler and Franco and Salazar and the Croatian dictator and so on, and the church. No contract with the one socialistic state which existed at that time, which was Russia. The Hitler Concordat is still valid in the German Federal Republic now. the priests are paid according to the Hitler Concordat. So it reaches right into our middle here. So John the 23rd wanted to make a change, called the council, but he was then blocked by his successors. He wanted to change course, and it did not work. So that is the question now, if this one will take the council seriously, not only pay lip service, but continue the course change. And that would mean that Solidarism will be as independent from liberalism as it will be from socialism, because it had it was a hang-up toward the right continually, particularly traditional Opus Dei and so on, tending powerfully to the right. We had a whole heretical church in Switzerland which did not accept the council and was excommunicated. Benedict XVI brought him in again. 4 bishops in England alone. One of these bishops was in the airport in Frankfurt and said that the Holocaust had never taken place. So that means Nazi to the last breath and so on. So, and he was taken in, but Hans Küng was not given back his permission to teach. So there is a little lopsidedness toward the right, which explains also the votes, the Catholic vote in the last 3 administrations. Okay, so that is what inner criticism means, so that we have that. And one more thing now about this Marxism we go to our movie there. Pope Francis is, as that we know, is not a liberal, and we can think about that a little bit deeper later on, but is he a Marxist or so? As Fox News and the super genius Rush Limbaugh there, they think that he's a Marxist. Limbaugh does not know what a Marxist is, and he doesn't know what the Pope is neither. Marxism originated from liberalism, we said, because it left out the fourth estate, the working class. So we had, soon after the Revolution, the French Revolution, we had one rebellion after the other. So in 1831, the fourth estate, or the working class, rebelled in Paris and burned it down. Then in 1870 again, and then in 1917 in Hamburg and Munich and in Petersburg, and that worked then 70 years they were in power, and then there was the third neoliberal counter-revolution was effective. There was a first one in the 1920s against Lenin. 12 capitalistic countries wanted to kill him, but they couldn't, so they were thrown out. There are still 8,000 Americans laying in Murmansk in the cemetery from that issue. So in Vladivostok also an attempt was made, and there are also still American graves there. Then they sent Hitler, of course. Hitler made it to the Volga. He almost made it, but then Zhukov, the dialectician, butchered him, the Sixth Army. So, and then 1989, then it was a third neoliberal counter-revolution, and that was successful to some extent, but we see with Putin and so on that socialistic elements are coming back again, because they were disappointed with the civil society as it was introduced with Gorbachev, and so they moved the other direction. They will not go back to Stalinism, that was red fascism, but they will find a form of socialism somehow. So, so this is where Marxism then comes in. Marxism originated from so the injustices which come about through liberalism by letting the strong go back and the weak are falling into the slums and so on. Then the Marxist movement comes from below in many different forms. You don't have to go into it. And then the ruling class, in order to rescue itself, brings the fascists in. So then Hitler, Mussolini, and so on, they put the communists in the concentration camp. We killed communists here by 1880 in New York and so on, and all the workers marched to the cemetery with them. And the greatest killer of communists was Hitler, of course, with his 27 million. But it did not help. Why socialism cannot stop is that the class system is not changed. So it's not if Marx lives or dead or whatever, the reality is not Marx or the socialists or whatever, the reality are the slums. The reality is the antagonism in society, in education, in the churches, in the country clubs. Everything is organized according to that class system. So, and it is the distribution of wealth, but it is also when you're in the slums, you not only have enough food, you're also not recognized. You are nothing. That is the horror in the whole thing. So both things have to be taken care of. And however that is done does not matter in the head of the people and so on. The issue is what is outside of our head. That is what you have on the other side of the railroad station down there. Okay, so, and we said that, of course, as Marxism, equality is the important thing. So will Pope Francis I make a difference? Where will he go? Certainly the Pope Francis is neither liberal nor Marxist, as little as Rabbi Jesus was a Pharisee or a Sadducee, or an Essene or a Zealot for whom they took him, or a Spartacus and so on. So the issue of where the Pope has to go, the foundation is not a book. Judaism is a religion of the book. Islam is a religion of the book. Christianity is the religion of a person, of the Rabbi Jesus of Nazareth and his teaching, and the Sermon on the Mount, which is the foundation, which is explicated in many parables and stories and so on. And that is something very precise and so on. And the Sermon on the Mount was not preached in order to show us how sinful we are. The Sermon on the Mount was preached in order to be done. So that is the measure stick by which the Pope's actions and our actions, everybody's actions, have to be measured.